Open your Bible, please, to 1 Peter chapter 3. 1 Peter chapter 3. In the little books of 1st and 2nd Peter, God used the Apostle Peter to write down 7 key reminders that, if you take seriously, can make your Christian experience come alive and can make spiritual boredom history. In these 7 key reminders, God reveals himself, his purposes for you, and his ways for you. And as you do what God says, you will experience him in a dynamic way. But there's something you must do. You must believe that these are from God, deep enough to make whatever adjustment in your lifestyle is necessary in order to do what God says. And all of this, God is trying to get you in on the great things he wants to do in your life. For the past 3 Sundays, we've been studying the reminder that every Christian is a holy and royal priest. And I know that strikes your ears a little strange, a little new. It's not new to the Bible, but it's certainly new to our concept. Because when you hear the word priest, my guess is that you immediately think of a person who characterizes another denomination and who is very separate, and who leads a lot of ceremonies and leads churches in maybe some mysterious ways, and who doesn't have a normal lifestyle as far as marriage and family go, and that's what most of you think of when you hear the word priest. And I want you to know that the word priest comes out of the Old Testament long before any Christian denomination existed. And a priest is a person who has access to God. That's just that simple. Do you have access to God? Only a priest, according to the Bible, can have access to God. And when he saves you, he gives you that access. He makes you a priest. Doesn't ordain you. Doesn't send you through a seminary. Give you special training. He gives you that status and that relationship and that position. And we've been studying that a New Testament Christian priest has 2 main ministry assignments, 2 main functions. Number 1, to offer up spiritual sacrifices to God. We've done some of that this morning. We've prayed and we've sung and praised God and we've given. And God will accept offerings only from a priest. I know that's a little foreign to our thinking, but it's really true. It's really biblical. It's really actually factually right. You see, you say, well, I never was a priest and God's accepted mine. If you're saved, you were a priest when he saved you. You just didn't know it. Or he would never accept your offering. He would never accept your prayer. Only from a priest who has access to God. And these offerings include doing good and meeting the needs and lives of our fellow man. The second function we have is to show the world how excellent Christ is. A priest represents the people to God and represents God to the people. And I don't want to re-preach the message I've already preached, but we've really Try to get serious about that. But whether you get the blessing out of this is going to depend on whether you believe it or not. You see. And that's a key and a critical point. Now, there are some examples in 1 Peter of how a priest serves. And all of them focus on relationships. None of them focus on formal religious practices. All of them focus on relationships. Some of them have a heavy emphasis on what goes inside the individual, but it finally comes out in influence and testimony. And it deals with relationships. Last Sunday, we looked at how we can serve as a priest in our behavior on the job and at home. And today we're going to look at how we can serve as a priest in our neighborhood and in our church fellowship. Because you're a priest everywhere you go and everywhere you are, and that makes you a priest in your neighborhood. And we're going to be dealing with the 3rd chapter, verses 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So let's just read that. To sum up, let all be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for this very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing. For, and there's a quote here from Psalm 34, for let him who means to love life and see good days refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. And let him turn away from evil and do good, and let him seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Now, I'm saying you're a priest in your neighborhood. I know the word neighbor is not here, but I'm taking the word neighbor as defined by Jesus in the story of the Good Samaritan, when he defined a neighbor as someone with whom we come in contact who needs our help. It would certainly include those people that live in your vicinity physically, close to your house and your community, but includes anybody or any group that God puts you with. They need your ministry. Now the test here, the question, the iffy here is, does Christ and salvation make a Christian a better neighbor? Is Christ excellent? Is it practical? Does it work? Does that really make a Christian? Does the shed blood of Christ, who cleanses us from all sin, really make us a better citizen of our community? How can you demonstrate the excellence of Christ in your neighborhood? Out there in the world, the people that you contact, what priestly sacrifice can you offer that will please God and bless your neighbor? Now, the obstacle to practicing your priesthood in your neighborhood is the individualistic isolationism that is growing in our society right now. You live next door to people and you hardly ever see them, you hardly ever know them, and they don't know you. People want to go in their house and shut their door, and nobody bother them. No one to answer the phone, all that kind of stuff is a terribly lonesome direction of our society, but that's the obstacle. I want you to look, however, at the 9th verse, again, at verse 3, at the last statement of that verse. For you were called for the very purpose, that you might inherit a blessing. You were called. Now, that's an important revelation in 1st and 2nd Peter and in the New Testament. Now, again, I remind you that this epistle was written to just general Christian folks. And he says, you were called. In fact, that word is used 7 times in the books of 1st and 2nd Peter. There are only 8 chapters. And the word chosen is used 4 times, and that means chosen or called, which are not exactly synonyms, but deal with the same idea, are used 11 times in 8 chapters here. That's got to be a big subject, because the chapters are not that long. Called means to invite or to summon. And chosen means selected or favored. And you need to know as a Christian that you have been called of God, you have been chosen of God, you have been made a priest of God. God has given you more status than you dreamed. And in tapping into that is where you're going to find the liveliness of your relationship to Him. There's several statements made about you being called. It says in 2 Peter 1:3 that God has called us by His own glory and excellence. It's His idea. 1 Peter 2:9 says that God has called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. 1 Peter 5:10 says that we have been called to His eternal glory in Christ. Don't you like that? And chosen and selected and special we are. This calling gives us great status. And 2 Peter 1:10 says we're to make certain about His calling and His choosing. But he says you are called to a purpose. He names the purpose there that you might inherit a blessing. God has a purpose in calling you. Back, I think, in the first message, I used the illustration about being chosen, being in grade school, going out on the playground, being chosen by the most popular student in the class to serve on his baseball team. Let's go back to that concept. You've been chosen to serve on the baseball team of the most popular student in the class. And he says, I want you to play first base. So, man, you wander off out toward first base, but all you can think about is the fact that I got chosen on the team by the captain. And you're standing out there on first base and you're just dreaming about how wonderful it is to be chosen. Man, I'm on this guy's team. And all of a sudden you realize that there's some action going on. The guy at home plate has hit the ball, he's running toward first, and the ball just whizzes right by you. And you miss it because you're thinking about how great it is to be chosen. Do you get the point? He's going to choose you next time for His team? You see, it's great to come and worship and say, God, thank you for saving me. That's right to do. That's okay to do. It's okay to think, well, I'm special to God because He's chosen me. But if you never get down to why He chose you, you're going to miss the main thing. And he says, you might want to turn and look at these. Verse 15. And see one of the statements why He has chosen you. But look who chose you, who called you. The Holy One who called you. Wasn't the nominating committee. Wasn't the pastor. The Holy One called you. That day when He called you down the aisle to trust Christ as your Savior or wherever you were. One who called you. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves. So He called you to be holy. Not holier than that. Holy like God is holy. Go to the second chapter. Look at verse 21. The subject of this passage is suffering, and he says, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in His steps. You have been called to suffer with Christ. Go to the third chapter and verse 9, and he said, you have been called for the very purpose. And he's talking about these eight things you do in your neighborhood to serve as a priest. You've been called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. So all of God's calling is for you to do something. Not just be something, but do something. Now, in verses 8 through 12, he names 8 priestly offerings that your neighbors need from you, that your neighborhood needs. Again, I come back to remind you that the kind of priestly work you do is not religious mumbo-jumbo, but it does represent Christ out there in the world and show how excellent he is. And here are the 8. 8 ways you can be salt and light. 8 ways you can show Christ is excellent in your neighborhood. And every one of them calls for you to make an adjustment to a godly lifestyle that is far above normal. Here they are. In verse 8, number 1, the first one, harmony. The offering of harmony. Be harmonious. Harmony in your neighborhood. In the groups where you are, be harmonious, not harmful. How do you do that? Harmony. I'm not a musician, but I think I know something about the difference in melody and harmony. Melody is pretty. Harmony just enhances the melody and enriches it, right? It's not the same notes. But there is such a thing as disharmony, and that's a sour note. And that does not focus good on the melody. That detracts from it and causes a grating on people's eardrums. We're to be harmony. That doesn't mean we're to be it's not saying we're to be unified with our neighbors. We're all supposed to be in a straitjacket and all just alike, just little tin soldiers marching along, all thinking alike, all acting alike. That's not what it says. But be harmonious. Let me suggest that one way you can do that is find points of agreement in thought and purpose with your neighbors, and be for your neighbors instead of against your neighbors. See, be harmonious. You might find it interesting, this is the same word that's used in Acts chapter 2 when it says they were all of one accord in one place. Secondly, there's the offering of sympathy. Be sympathetic. Let yourself be touched with the feeling of your neighbors. Feel with them. Tremendous statement of mine. One of my favorite statements, Romans 12:15. Rejoice with those that rejoice, and weep with those that weep. Let them know there's somebody on their block, somebody in that group that's in tune with how they feel. They might not ought to feel that way, in your opinion, but that's not the point. They do feel that way. And if you will get in touch with how they feel and be sympathetic with how they feel, you can show how excellent Christ is to you. Because doesn't Christ care how we feel? Isn't this Christ-like? Third offering, the offering of brotherly love. Be brotherly. It says here. Among other things, that means that you would accept your neighborhood as your neighborhood family. It's not us and them. It's not those foreigners that live in this area. It's us. We're a neighborhood family. And in the midst of all that hatred and harshness and unforgiveness and jealousy and envy and gossip, you're injecting brotherly love in your neighborhood. You see how you work as a priest in your neighborhood? Doesn't your neighborhood need some love in it? Can't we use some of that in Gallup? How about Albuquerque? We ought to export some of it to Albuquerque. Tragic when children start killing children. Young people start killing young people. Horrible. We need this. Now, this is not the bedroom kind of love that many want to spread around. This is brotherly love. Don't get the two confused. But your neighbors need you to love them, even if they don't love you. The fourth offering is kind-heartedness. Put kindness into your neighborhood. Kindness. A lot of bitterness in the world, a lot of unkindness and harshness. This goes right along with brotherly love. Put kind-heartedness there. Have a heart Let them know there's somebody there who has a tender heart. The fifth offering that you offer in your neighborhood as a priest is the offering of humility. Be humble in spirit. You cannot go into your neighborhood and say, now folks, I want y'all to know I'm learning something in my church. The Bible tells me I'm a priest and I'm better than y'all are. And I know more than y'all do. And if y'all want to come up to my level, we'll talk. That's not the way you do it. I'm impressed with the fact that Paul called himself the chief of sinners. And don't forget that Jesus received sinners and ate with them. Pharisees didn't like that. They said he's no good. But he knew better. And they knew better. A humble spirit. Really, this word for humble, the King James Version translates it courteous, and really that's probably the best translation because it has to do with courtesy. Rudeness does not show that Christ is excellent. Neighbors, I've said, may not just be the folks that live in the houses close to you. It could be the people that are driving in front of you down the street. And they don't drive like you think they ought to drive. So what do? Honk at them, stick your fist out the window. And they look back and they say, what a Christian. And see, you got this sign on your bumper that says, Jesus is Lord. Woo! The sixth offering is returning a blessing for a curse. Give a blessing, it says. Give a blessing. Especially when your neighbors do you wrong. No retaliation, no getting even, no paying back. Returning a blessing for a cursing. I used to look at the Old Testament and I'd read those passages about those Old Testament patriarchs, and they would bless their sons and they would bless people. And I thought, man, they had some kind of thing we don't have, but that's not true. You have power to bless people. You can say some words that will just lift people and bless them. Can't you? Has anybody ever blessed you like that? Just a little compliment, just a smile, just a paying attention, just a listening, just a sharing of emotion, of feeling. You can bless your neighbors. You have the power to do that. And particularly since the Holy Spirit lives in you as a priest of God. So do that. That's an offering. That's a sacrifice. That won't come easy. And the seventh offering is that of Christian speech. Verse 10. This is a quote out of the Psalm. Refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking guile. No deceit, no gossip, no profanity. Christian speech. Your neighborhood needs that. Our world needs it too. Media needs that. And the eighth offering is the offering of choosing good. Verse 11. Let him turn away from evil and do good. You turn away from evil, do good. You turn away from the evil that your neighbors are trapped in. You don't get trapped in that. And you turn away from the evil that your neighbors do to you. You return good for that, and you are a good, positive force in your society. You stand for what's right and good, and that's the way you do it. Isn't that practical? Doesn't that make sense? That's your function in your neighborhood. The results that you might inherit a blessing. It says in verse 12 here, the eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous. He's watching what you're doing. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. Whether they're the ones who initiated the evil or retaliating with evil, his face is against those who do evil. And if you're going to get caught up in doing evil, you're going to get out at house with the Lord. Even if it's with your neighbor and you think he deserved it. You're going to get in trouble with him. Not only that, but it says God is listening to the prayers, to your prayers. How you treat your neighbor affects your prayer life. Because his face is against those who do evil. You can pray effectively for your neighbor. You got any neighbors that need a priest? You got any neighbors that need somebody to pray for them? I mean, they may be alcoholic, they may be abusers, they may be in bad trouble, they may be in emotional trouble. Do you have any neighbors that need somebody to pray for them? You have a direct line because you're saved. And you can go to God for them and get God active in their life. Priestly stuff, people. See, it's more to it than just enjoying the church service. So much more. Well, verse 13 of chapter 3 through verse 4 deal with practicing your priesthood and your suffering, and that's such a big subject. We're going to deal with that next Sunday, the Lord willing. Go to chapter 5, and we're going to deal with the other subject this morning, that is practicing your priesthood in your church relationship. Therefore I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive an unfading crown of glory. And you younger men likewise be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety upon him, because he cares for you. Now we just got time just to hit the high spots in this one. The issue here is relationships. There's no mention here of worship and praying and giving and teaching and all these other things that we do in our church life. Those are dealt with elsewhere. But the relationship is the focus here. And most of the problems that happen in churches are relationship problems, right? We get it out with one another. And so that's the focus here. How to serve as a priest in our church relationship. The test is, will we show that Christ is excellent in how we relate to one another in our church? You ever hear anybody say, I don't know about those people, but I promise you they take care of their church members? You ever hear anybody say something like that? That's the test. That's the issue. So what do? You say, well, I don't have to be a priest at church. We got a preacher. No, I'm not talking about being a preacher. We're talking about each of us functioning in the Lord. Now, the relationship, the sacrifice of relationship focuses first on the pastor-member relationship. It talks to the elders and it talks to the younger ones. The elders and the youngers, and that's the way that gets at this. There are three types of offerings that the pastors or elders are to give. Number one, their work offering. It's two-pronged. It says here, shepherd the flock. Shepherd the flock. That's tend the flock, preach to the flock, teach the flock, counsel the flock, guide the flock, rebuke the flock, encourage the flock, shepherd the flock. That's the pastor's first responsibility. Work offering. The other is exercise oversight, and that means superintend. And that has to do with administration, planning, and leading, and so forth. And those offerings, the pastor, and I notice the word is elders plural, and I think this includes the staff, all the pastors, all the leaders. But that's the first offering. There is an attitude offering. They are to do their work willingly, not grudgingly, according to the will of God, eagerly, and not dictatorially, not lording it over those that are put in their charge. That's their attitude offering of the pastor and pastors. And then there's the example offering, verse 3, and that's being an example to the flock. And that's the responsibility that I carry, and Brother Harold carries, and every pastor carries, and that's the offering that we have to make. Now, I know pastors are expected to do a lot of things, but we really need to come back to the Bible and see what the Lord expects a pastor to do, and hope and pray that he does it in the will of the Lord. There's the offering of the members, and that's in verse 5a. Be subject to your elders. That word subject, submit, is a big word in 1 Peter. Have you noticed that? It's in every one of our relationships. And that word means fit in like the pieces of a puzzle. A church is a body. It's like the pieces of a puzzle. It's like the parts of a building, and each of us fits in our place. And he says here, you be subject to your elders. They have responsibility to do these things, to shepherd and to administrate and these things, but they can't feed you if you won't eat. You ladies ever have the experience of making the best meal you could make, putting it out on the table, and somebody comes to the table and says, well, I didn't want that. That doesn't look good. Well, that's enough said, but see, they can't shepherd you if you won't sheep, okay? It's not possible. That's really the point here. They can't lead you if you won't follow. Now, this doesn't give anybody dictatorial authority. This is talking about relationships here. And Peter really is a man of few words, and I wish I had more time to elaborate on that. But right quickly in verse 5, he says, and all of you. So he gets to the fact that here there are some relationships, pastor and church, but all of you, he says, pastor, church, everybody has this responsibility to clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Nobody has a right to lord it over anybody else and to act like they're the big shot and the big boss. No deacon, no pastor, no leader, no personality. Nobody can say to the church, well, just listen to me. I got all the answers. You folks sit down and shut up and do what I tell you. Nobody has that right. We all clothe ourselves with humility. Now, we all got dressed this morning. I put on some of the best clothes I've got. I wanted to look nice. I messed with my hair and even sprayed some glue stuff on it. Both of them. And that's all right. That's okay. But be sure before you leave the house to go to your worship service, put on the outer clothing of humility. And it gives a warning here. The warning is God is opposed to the proud but gives grace to the humble. And every once in a while factions rise up in churches and so forth, and they want to be superior and get everybody under their thumb. And the minute that happens, they are in opposition to him. And the church finds itself with God as an adversary. He promised he would. And you want to get it out with God? You start acting smart aleck in the church fellowship. That's what I call it. See? Boy, Peter doesn't say many words, but he gets right down to the issues, doesn't he? And he says, let God be God. Verse 7 of that 5th chapter. Casting all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Verse 6, humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God. And then cast all your care on him. If you're worried about the pastor, if you're worried about the staff, if you're worried about the money, if you're worried about the program, if you're worried about the budget, if you're concerned, the first thing, I don't like the way I can say that. The first thing many of us do is run out and tell somebody else about it. Did you know that I'm so worried about this? Don't do that. You're going to get everybody in trouble, yourself with God and everything else. Tell it to God. Now, if he's God, he can handle it. If he's not God, we're wasting our time. He can handle it. That's what he's saying here. All these relationships, if it's not working right, tell it to him. And thirdly, he talks about a denominational relationship in verse 13, and he uses one word to describe that, greetings. That's the word. You look at that. We don't have time to deal with it. The results of good, priestly, healthy relationships in church, and everybody fulfilling their responsibility and doing our part and fitting in like a puzzle, the pastors will get an unfading crown. I like that idea, but we don't know. And then he says in verse 6, God will exalt you at the proper time. You don't have to puff up and act smart. He'll exalt you when it's the right time for you to be exalted. Verse 7, he said, God cares for you. In verse 10, he says, after you have suffered a little while, this is what God's going to do for you. He's going to perfect you and confirm you and strengthen and establish you. God is working in your life if you'll let him. You'll open up to him and let him. He warns us in the closing part of this chapter, watch out for the devil, because he's trying to devour people. He wants to destroy and ruin your relationship, your fellowship with God. He wants to destroy your influence in your neighborhood. He'll bring up something that's going to really make you act unchristian. He wants to defile your church fellowship. He loves to do that. And the way to keep him from it is to get back with the Lord and get with the Lord and do it His way. The point I'm making today is decide that in a very positive way you're going to begin to get active in doing these things that God says we're supposed to do in our neighborhood and in our church and in our home and in our community and on the job and in our character. And when you do, when you decide that you're going to bring your life in line with what God has said is Christian activity, and get positive about it, not just sit and kind of be docile, but get positive about it, you're going to find the glory of God in your life. We're going to stand and sing an invitation hymn. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, I believe is what we're singing today. And I urge you to do that and submit yourself to Him, whatever the call of God to your heart is. We talked about His call. And if you sense His call, His drawing to you, saying, leave where you are in your spiritual life and come to where I am. Trust me as your Savior. Confess me before men. Be baptized. Join the church. Give your life. Whatever.